On the morning of January 31st, 2026, 1.5 million Kenyan families woke up to a text message. It said, Samahani KOKO customer, we regret to inform you KOKO is closing operations today. That was it. No warning, no transition plan, no alternative. By that same morning, 3,000 fuel dispensing machines across Kenya had gone dark. 700 employees had been told not to come to work, and over a million households that had been cooking on clean, affordable bioethanol the night before now had nothing. KOKO Networks was not a struggling startup. It had raised over 100 million US dollars. It was backed by the World Bank. It was celebrated internationally as proof that clean energy could work in Africa. The technology worked. The customers loved it. The demand was real. What killed it was not the market. What killed it was one letter. That one letter that the Kenyan government refused to sign. This is the story of how KOKO Networks was built, how it was sabotaged, and what its collapse means to every family that trusted it. To understand what was lost, you first need to understand what KOKO actually built. Kenya has a charcoal problem. It always has. Over 80% of urban Kenyan households cook on charcoal or kerosene. Both are dirty, both are dangerous. Indoor air pollution from cooking fires kills more than 400 Kenyans every year, mostly children under 5, and charcoal drives deforestation. Every kilogram of charcoal burned in a Nairobi kitchen represents trees cut down somewhere in Kenya's forests. In 2013, an Australian entrepreneur named Greg Murray arrived in Kenya with an idea to solve this. What if you could replace charcoal with bioethanol, a clean burning fuel made from sugarcane, and make it cheaper than charcoal for ordinary families? The problem was economics. Bioethanol costs more to produce than charcoal. If you sold it at a market price, poor families could not afford it. The math did not work. But Murray had a solution: carbon credits. Every household that switched from charcoal to bioethanol reduced carbon emissions. Those reductions could be certified and sold as carbon credits on international markets to airlines, corporations, governments trying to offset their own emissions. At roughly $20 per credit, KOKO was generating approximately 6 million credits a year. That carbon revenue allowed KOKO to sell bioethanol at half the market price, 100 shillings a litre, and their cooking stoves, which normally cost 15,000 shillings, were sold to customers for just 1,500 shillings, a 90% discount. The model was elegant. Carbon markets from the rich world subsidized clean energy for the poor world, and it worked. By 2019, KOKO had launched its first network of high-tech bioethanol dispensing ATMs, KOKO Points, installed in corner shops and small kiosks across Nairobi. The design was smart. Customers would buy a reusable fuel bottle, walk to their nearest KOKO point, which would be the shop on their street, fill it up for 100 shillings and take it home to connect to their KOKO stove. No gas cylinders, no heavy containers, no smoke. The network grew fast. 1,000 machines, then 2,000, then 3,000, spread across Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, and other urban centers. By 2025, 1.5 million households were using KOKO. Hundreds of thousands of women, the primary cooks in most Kenyan households, had swapped charcoal for a clean blue flame. The investors came in. Microsoft's Climate Innovation Fund, Mirova, Vired Capital, Rand Merchant Bank, over 100 million US dollars rise across debt and equity. Then in March 2025, the World Bank's Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MIGA, issued KOKO a $179.6 million political risk guarantee. It was the first guarantee of its kind in history, specifically designed to protect KOKO if a government broke its carbon market commitments. The World Bank was essentially saying, we believe in this company so much that we will cover the risk of government interference. That guarantee will become very important very soon. The trouble did not start in January 2026. It started years earlier, quietly. In 2023, the Kenyan government reportedly refused KOKO's application to import bioethanol. The reason given was market protection, but the effect was devastating. KOKO was forced to source ethanol locally, where supply was inconsistent and prices were significantly higher. The margins that kept the model alive began to shrink. Then came the carbon credit battle. KOKO's entire business was financed by selling carbon credits into international compliance markets, especially the aviation industry's carbon scheme called Corsia. But to sell into these compliance markets, you need a document from your national government, a letter of authorization. In June 2024, the Kenyan government signed an investment framework agreement with KOKO that would allow exactly that. It seemed like the problem was resolved, but it was not resolved. Behind the scenes, a dispute was growing. The government was waking up to the value of carbon credits, Kenya's forests, Kenya's clean air, Kenya's emissions reduction. Officials began urging that KOKO was claiming too large a share of Kenya's national carbon credit allocation, that a foreign company was extracting a sovereign national resource for offshore profit. Trade Secretary Lee Kinyanjui publicly stated that KOKO had sought to claim an acceptable share of Kenya's entire carbon credit allocation. KOKO's position was equally clear. Without selling into compliance markets, the carbon revenue that subsidized fuel prices would collapse. The company could not survive on voluntary carbon markets alone. The prices were too low. 2 days of emergency board meetings followed in late January 2026. The conclusion was brutal. Without the letter of authorization, the business was over. On January 31st, 2026, the text message went out. Samahani KOKO customer, we regret to inform you KOKO is closing operations today. 3,000 machines went dark. 700 employees were told to stay home. Thousands of agents, mostly women shopkeepers who ran KOKO points in their stores, lost their primary source of income overnight. The next day, KOKO filed for administration. PricewaterhouseCoopers took over the assets, 3,000 machines, the manufacturing platform, the technology were put up for sale. As of July 2026, administrators are seeking buyers for a minimum of 15 million US dollars, and the World Bank guarantee KOKO's investors are expected to file a claim for the full $179 million. If the World Bank pays, Kenya's treasury will be built. Kenyan taxpayers will pay for the government's decision to block the letter. And what about the 1.5 million families? Energy experts warned immediately that most would return to charcoal. The clean cooking gains of years reversed overnight. The deforestation that KOKO was slowly accelerating again, the indoor air pollution that was killing 400 Kenyans a year, back in full force. The story of KOKO Networks is not a simple story. The Kenyan government's argument is not entirely wrong. Carbon credits generated from Kenya's forests and Kenya's families should benefit Kenya, not just foreign investors. The question of who owns the value of country's natural asset is a legitimate one, but the way this dispute was handled left 1.5 million families paying the price of a fight between a government and a company, and it sent a message to every international investor watching. Building infrastructure in Kenya that depends on the government approval is a risk you may not be able to hedge. KOKO proved that clean cooking at a scale in Africa is possible. The technology worked, the demand was real, the families who used it loved it. What failed was not the idea, what failed was the system around the idea. And that is perhaps the most heartbreaking kind of failure after all. That was the story of KOKO Networks. Subscribe because on this channel, we document stories about African businesses and we are just getting started.